Good morning, everyone. Andrew Kircher here again with Port Huron Museums, the community engagement manager there. And this is just another in our continuing series of some walks around town, looking at some of the cooler architectural features that you might see in Port Huron. It's a little bit foggy out today, but it still makes for a nice kind of crisp day for a walk. So this is actually a request, and I think a really neat one. Today we are in Sherman Woods, the Sherman Woods Association. So if you aren't quite sure where we are at the corner here of Gratiot and Edison. So morning, everyone. I see some of our regulars are checking in. Glad to have you guys with us. So we are on this Gratiot. If you go a little bit further north, you'd be at Lakeside Beach, and we are on Edison. And I wanted to take you guys around, kind of go on a little whirlwind tour and talk about the subdivision here, kind of as a whole. Maybe point out a couple of the cooler houses or some of the things that I kind of like to see. I think this is a pretty cool neighborhood, and it's got a pretty interesting history. So it dates back to the 1920s. If you think about the way a city grows, cities typically start as kind of a central core, usually around a river. It's kind of what happened in Port Huron, around like the Black River. It kind of expanded out from there. It kind of goes in waves, and by the time you get to the 20th century, you start building these kind of subdivisions like this, plots of land where you are going to put buildings that are expressly designed for people to live in. So these are places for people to work in Port Huron, and then they kind of live in one of these neighborhoods. And this is something that we think of a lot today. I know some of the people here watching should find this place pretty familiar. I had some friends who lived here. A good friend of mine lived right in this neighborhood, so I thought a lot of people are probably familiar with it. If you haven't been through here, you probably have been maybe through at Christmas time. That's a popular time to come through. They string up lights. There's like these orbs they put in the trees. It's pretty cool looking. So here's one of the first kind of styles I might comment on. We've got this kind of a Tudor revival, and you can see this, it's called like half timbering, where you can see the logs kind of looks like kind of like the Renaissance, I suppose. You see this a lot in different European countries, especially Northern Europe, but you see it a lot in the 1920s. It's called Tudor revival, and that's kind of one of the big giveaways for that kind of style. So a lot of the homes you're going to see here were built in the 1920s. Some are obviously much newer than that. That's kind of when they start to divide up the land. Some of the buildings are obviously still under construction there, but the entire neighborhood was designed to be kind of an upper middle class, nice place to live. It's right by the lake. You can see that kind of void where the street ends. That's obviously fog out on the lake. So we'll walk down that way. And I think there's another couple of cool kind of Tudor revival, some colonial revival. That's a lot of the homes you see in here are colonial revival homes. Now, we've looked a lot the last couple times. We've watched a lot of Queen Anne homes. This is kind of the next thing that comes up after Queen Anne. You see lots of this. Now, colonial revival really starts in 1876. So if you're at all a history nerd, you can probably figure 1876, well, that's the centennial of the country. Just like 1976 was the bicentennial. People were getting really excited about early American history. And so you see a lot of homes right around then, and it really starts to peak in like the 19-teens, the 1920s, that a lot of the homes that are being built are copying some of the early American forms, or at least a throwback to them. There are some other really interesting things going on. This is one place in particular I really like. It kind of looks like an adobe house. I'm guessing it's not actually adobe because we're not in the Southwest. But you can see some pretty cool styles like that pop up in the 1920s. You see Southwest influence, you see a Spanish influence. There's a bunch of homes in the 20s that are popular with kind of a Mexican tile, the red rounded tile you see. This one's clearly got some of that Southwest influence, kind of looks like the Alamo. Here we've got another one of these really cool kind of Tudor revival. There's some neat things about it. If you look up on the chimney there, it's got those kind of rounded chimney pots. So you can see it's still kind of an asymmetrical house. This isn't one that looks exactly the same left and right. But the interior design would be quite a bit different than one of those Queen Anne homes. So a Queen Anne home, when you go inside one of those, you're typically into a very formal front hall, and then into a sitting room or a parlor and a dining room and a kitchen. Everything is very compartmentalized and very, very formal. As you start to move into the 20th century, you see people realize, like, oh, maybe I don't want a parlor, I want a living room. And that's just kind of a name change, but that actually tells you a lot about that, because people are using their houses a little bit differently, a lot more informally in the 1920s. So you can see here's a nice Sherman Woods sign and some of their private beach here. We'll maybe walk a block down and a couple blocks back up. It's pretty windy out there, so the water's really coming ashore today. So again, a Tudor revival. This, again, kind of big triangular shape is popular with the door off. It's almost certainly their living room, a comfortable place. I'd want a great big window if I got to look out at the lake every day as well. Something you're going to see that's pretty common there. Now, this place is called Sherman Woods, and I think even the name has a pretty neat history. Sherman is a pretty big, important Port Huron. There's a guy named L.A. Sherman in the 1850s and 60s who helps found the Port Huron Times, which goes on to be the Times Herald. When they merged, there were a few newspapers in Port Huron. L.A. Sherman was also pretty, well, famous to me anyway. I'm sure no one else. I always find it fascinating. He really liked technology, and as a result, he is the first person to make a phone call in the city of Port Huron. He really wanted to get on board. He's an early adopter of technology, and so he made a phone call from his house to his office here in town on Christmas Day, and I think it was 1879. It was like the year after you could start buying phones, and I think that's pretty cool. And he has his kids go on to be involved with some developers. So when they buy the land here, it gets named Sherman Woods. And there's some pretty cool. Conger here is named after Omer D. Conger, who was the United States Senator, who was from Port Huron, which I think is pretty cool. There's another really cool house down there with kind of a flat top, which you see probably from the 1960s. So some of the other famous Sherman is Frederick Sherman. This is L.A. Sherman's grandson. He actually attends the Naval Academy. He joins the Navy. He's born in the 1880s, but he rises through the ranks, and by the 1940s, he's actually an admiral during World War II. He's in charge of the Lexington, which unfortunately is sunk, or at least it had to be scuttled after it was attacked by the Japanese. And Sherman didn't go down with the ship, but he was the last person off. So he survived the war. He was at the dedication of Memorial Stadium. Pretty influential guy, as you might imagine. So that's kind of the Sherman family and Sherman Woods. All right, so here's a perfect example of some of that colonial revival I was talking about. This house right here. This is very much in kind of the federal style. Sometimes they call it Adams style after an architect from England. But you'll notice this house is nice and symmetrical. It's the same left and right, although it looks like there's a chimney on this side. Maybe if this house had really been built in the colonial time, there would have been a fireplace on the other side. Otherwise, this half of the house would have been pretty cold. Obviously, that chimney is more for decoration and kind of nice to have a nice warm fire, but I'm sure there's, central heating. They're not relying on that fireplace to warm things up. You'll notice it's got kind of that flat front. It's got a little Greek pediment there, and some pilasters right up against the door. And it's very, very flat. That's very typical of that kind of federal style. Whereas the colonial style, sometimes a little more three-dimensional, but same idea, three-dimensional. It's got a cross gable roof there, so you're not looking at the triangular end like you do with a lot of the Tudor revival homes like that. what else is there to say? There's, like I said, it's a nice little neighborhood. It's a nice day to be outside, kind of walk around and take a look and see what you're seeing. Like I said, this place is very popular in the winter. We're at Armour and LaSalle here. LaSalle is named after, well, the LaSalles from the French who are coming through, like Antoine LaSalle, who are some of the earliest Europeans to show up in this area. Here's another good example of kind of colonial style. This house kind of has some of the same forms as like a salt box, and this is really early colonial. That's one of the ideas of colonial revival in the 20th century. They didn't always get it historically correct, and that's fine. It's its own thing. So they were sometimes thinking they were copying buildings from the 1770s when really they were much earlier. This kind of salt box style where the front half of the building, or the top half, overhangs just a little bit, would have been really popular in like the era of the Pilgrims, like Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 17th century. Sometimes you'll see, they're called pendrils. They'll hang down on like the corners. This one doesn't have any. I'll point some out if I see one. But kind of, again, it's its own design. And of course you want to update. Nobody wants to live in a home like the Pilgrims where you have to have a fire to stay warm. You're going to use some of these ideas to like make reference to, call back, and make your house a lot more comfortable to live. Here's a house I really like. This one has some cool ivy on the front. That's another thing that would have been really popular with this Tudor revival. Tudor revival was particularly popular in Michigan. A lot of that had to do with Henry Ford. He really liked that. His place called Fair Lane down in Dearborn, if you've ever gotten to see that, is like a Tudor revival mansion. And it's tied in a lot with kind of the arts and crafts movement, if you ever heard that. Arts and crafts, the idea kind of behind that movement was that people wanted to see workmanship. They wanted to see real things in their home. They didn't want to fake it, as it were. They were beginning to have the ability to fake materials, and they said, no, there's something earnest in, you know, simple hard work and showing that cool material. So anyway, we've walked just a couple of blocks in Sherman Woods here. I think it's, like I said, a cool neighborhood, a good one to take a chance, take a drive through if you get the chance to see it, especially in the wintertime. There's some good examples of some 1920s homes, at least a couple of the styles. You don't see a lot of bungalows in there. But there are quite a few of those in other places in town. We might make a trip there. So again, hopefully you've enjoyed your little walk with me if you haven't been able to get out of the house. And you can appreciate the history in your own backyard, since it's all around us, right down to the street names and things like that. Again, my name is Andrew Kircher. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Port Huron Museums. If you've liked what you've seen, you can always support the museum a number of different ways. You can buy a membership today. You can buy tickets. They'll be good for a full year from whenever the museum is able to reopen. You can check those out on our website, which is phmuseum.org, or just type into Google. It'll pop right up, Port Huron Museums. If you liked these videos, you want to see some more, throw up some comments, like these, share these with your friends. I've kind of enjoyed doing them. I think people have enjoyed watching them, at least I hope so. As long as it's not raining, I'll be able to go out and keep doing some of these and some other areas. I might talk a little bit about historic preservation, I think, and maybe historic districts. I think that's something that is woefully misunderstood. We'll put it that way. People are afraid of them, and they shouldn't be. So yeah, again, thanks for coming along. If you like what you see, don't be afraid to let us know in the comments, or give me some suggestions. Port Huron's a big place. I grew up here, but I still don't know all the cool houses and buildings in town. And who knows, if this goes on long enough, my car's got a full tank of gas. Gas is cheap. Maybe we'll head out on the road into other parts of St. Clair County. All right, so until next time, thanks for joining us.